Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the September 25th, 2024 meeting of the Fond du Lac City Council. The first item of business is roll call, which is done electronically, and I will declare a quorum is present. The next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, which is followed by a moment of silent reflection. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on our agenda is a proclamation recognizing October 6th through the 12th, 2024 as Fire Prevention Week. We'd like to invite our Community Risk and Prevention Specialist, Rachel Vaughn, to come meet me down in front to accept the proclamation. Whereas the City of Fond du Lac is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in and visiting Fond du Lac, and whereas fire is a serious public safety concern both locally and nationally, and homes are the locations where people are at greatest risk from fire, and whereas roughly 3 out of 5 fire deaths happen in homes with either no smoke alarms or with no working smoke alarms, and whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in reported home fires in half by sensing smoke well before you can and alerting you to danger during an event which you may have as little as 2 minutes to escape safely. And whereas Fond du Lac residents should install smoke alarms in every sleeping room, outside each separate sleeping area, and on every level of the home, test the smoke alarms monthly, and have a planned and practiced fire escape plan. And whereas the 2024 Fire Prevention Week theme, Smoke Alarms, Make Them Work for You, serves to remind us of the importance of having working smoke alarms in the home. Now, therefore, I, Tiffany Brault, President of the Fond du Lac City Council, do hereby proclaim October 6th through the 12th, 2024 as Fire Prevention Week and urge the community to make sure their homes have working smoke alarms and to support the Fond du Lac Fire Rescue during Fire Prevention Week 2024 by visiting them during their open house on Tuesday, October 8th from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. at the Public Safety Training Center at 750 North Rolling Meadows Drive in Fond du Lac. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah. Thank you, City Council. Fond du Lac Fire Rescue wants to remind Fond du Lac residents just how important smoke alarms are. They're often the first line of defense when it comes to home fires. We at Fond du Lac Fire Rescue, through a partnership with the Red Cross, will install smoke alarms free of charge for any resident in the city of Fond du Lac. In the last 5 years, we've installed over 300 smoke alarms to residents in Fond du Lac and the surrounding areas through this program. Fire events in homes occur all too often in the city, so we encourage residents to have a fire safety plan in place. This plan should start with installing smoke alarms on every level of the home, testing smoke alarms monthly, and changing the batteries twice a year. We also want to remind residents to practice their home fire escape drills. Make sure you know 2 ways out of every room, choose a safe outdoor meeting spot, and once outside, never re-enter a burning building. As Tiffany stated, Fond du Lac Fire Rescue, along with 5 neighboring departments in Fond du Lac County, are hosting our annual Fire Prevention Week open house Tuesday, October 8th from 4 to 7 at the Public Safety Training Center. This event is completely free and family-friendly. We encourage all Fond du Lac residents to attend to learn about fire safety, what you can do to prepare yourself in the event of an emergency, and to see the training and equipment that your local departments use in the event of emergencies to keep you and your family safe. Thank you again, City Council, for recognizing this year's Fire Prevention Week. Smoke alarms, make them work for you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is public hearings, and we have none, so we will move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda finalizes the proposed actions for the meeting. A, September 11th, 2024 minutes, and B, list of claims dated September 18th, 2024. Are there any questions or discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Mullen and second by Mr. Godfrey. Thank you. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Next on our agenda is audience comments. Agenda and non-agenda items. The presiding officer will limit speaking time for non-agenda items to 1 minute and items noticed on the agenda to 5 minutes. Ms. Hefter, do we have anyone wishing to speak? We do. Yes, we do have a few. So we will start with Nick Tefke, who wishes to speak on the housing study, and he is otherwise.
Good evening. My name is Nick Tefke, and I'm president of Hope on the Block. I believe you may have heard of us in the last city council meeting. I understand that you will be reviewing a housing study tonight. That's a good step, but as someone who has been downtown every single day for the last 2+ years, working with those in our community that lack housing, I'd be happy to share a lot of the things that contribute to that issue. I won't even charge you for a study. All of the work I do in the community is free. I do hope that the study you will review tonight has some solutions identified in it, but when it comes to implementing those solutions, I don't believe it will be the city doing that. If there are housing needs, that will need to come from the private sector. If there are temporary shelter and other services needed, that will need to come from the nonprofits. Jobs that allow us to contribute will need to come from the business community. And the faith that our community can finally come together to find real solutions to these issues, and that people should stick with us, will need to come from the churches. What we are asking of you in city government is to be leaders. Build a table somewhere and drag all those people, all the stakeholders to it. It is past time we all sat face to face as a community to develop community-based solutions to these issues. We need to find solutions that have buy-in from the city, buy-in from the business community, buy-in from the nonprofits and the churches. We need to understand what the city will allow us to do so that we aren't out there trying to find solutions only to have the city tell us, you can't do this here, you can't do that there. We have wasted enough time and community investment on solutions once cheered by the city. Y'all showed up to our ribbon cutting at the library to shake hands and take pictures, only to then decide years down the road you don't like that solution anymore. We all understand that this community has issues that need to be addressed. But moving people down the street or off a park bench or moving a pantry away from the library are not solutions. It is time for you all to lead. Bring the community together, try to repair some of the trust that has been lost, and develop real solutions that we can all buy into and we can get to work on implementing. And if you're not willing or capable of leading that effort, of bringing our community together instead of dividing us, then please get out of the way and let someone else do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Donna Richards, who also wishes to speak on the housing study, and also it's otherwise.
I'm talking about both, the issue from last meeting as well as the housing study. So I'll start with the non-agenda item, which should have been an agenda item this week because it was an input item, and it would have been an action item had you chosen to take action today. And that's part of what I want to talk about. It's not your fault that you took an input item and made it into an action item. You did do it, so you have to take responsibility for it. But just to give you, we've lost institutional history, and that's, of course, one of the reasons why I think we need some governance reform around here, because we have lost institutional history. We don't have minutes of meetings. Anyways, when action items and input items was implemented, the idea was that people can't talk about an issue till they hear about it. So the public would not be able to be engaged in an item that was farther down the agenda at the beginning of a meeting on an input item. So or they can try, but they wouldn't know what's being said about it yet. So the idea of an input item is it comes before council, council gets input, citizens get input,
All right,
they walk away. Oh, that's a minute?
That's been a
Okay.
minute on the non-agenda item. Could you move
Yeah,
on to
so anyways, so yeah, I think that's a problem. And I will get technical about it for a moment. When I look at the open meetings law, the guidance written by our Attorney General, basically it says that if an item is on the agenda, hey, no, don't cut me off. If an item is on the agenda, it's supposed to be descriptive of the item itself. Otherwise, it's not a legitimate item and can actually be challenged, maybe even in court, for not being a legitimate item. The label on this item was, please tell me, refresh me, it's like update of police procedure related to state law. How does that tell us that this has anything to do with camping and the homeless? So people were not, unless they were tuned in ahead of time, aware that this was such a critical issue. And I did send some of you that guidance by the Attorney General. It's on page 15 or 16, so please take a look at it. If anybody else wants to look at it, you just look at the open meetings law. Okay, back on to the rest of my points. But I agree with Nick that it should be put on hold and it's honest procedures should be developed to deal with the issues of the homeless as a community. And the role of AVCAP needs to be questioned in terms of coordination because they haven't done the job. Okay, as far as the market report goes, I mean, I'm real excited about the future of the city related to housing issues. I think we've come a long ways in terms of having perhaps what might be considered a pipeline. But I'm concerned about the term ALICE, which you may wish to look up. It means people who don't have the resources to have housing, and it's 38% of our population in the city falls under that definition. They're spending too much money on housing, and I am again concerned that unfortunately our COVID money was not spent on some of these most critical issues, and that we do have some funds to do it now. We have the $2.5 million in the trust fund to do some things. The last thing I want to talk about real briefly, a minute and 28 seconds, is the most critical thing for me in housing development is design itself. I don't know if you can think about that, but that's really important. It defines what a city is, and the city has a certain character, but that character can be lost real easily if inappropriate designs are built in critical areas. And the fact that our community development department does not divulge the plans for buildings before they have a development agreement together is again also improper. But I think that, and right now one should be able to see all those things. It should be in public, and if the excuse is used that this should be in closed meetings, they are wrong about that. That needs to be in an open discussion of design, finances, structure, who's going to live there, what the incomes are, what the distribution is, and how our city funds are spent. And you're talking about a lot of money on the corner of Macy and Johnson, and I'm real excited about it if it's done right, but it could be the worst thing in the world if it's not. And council has every right to know what those plans look like. So I have 11 seconds, Patrick. You're waiting for somebody to cut me off at 0. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say, and I'm just hoping that council does a better job of taking the bull by the horns and making sure that what we get developed is beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richards. Mr. Mullen, you had your light on. Did you actually want to? Okay. All right. Next, we will have Amy Renee, who also wishes to speak on the housing study and is also otherwise.
Hi, I am Amy, and I am the Vice President of Operations for Hope on the Block, and I co-run the Human Rights Activists of Fond du Lac County. I'm going to approach this a little differently because I wanted to come here and I wanted to be angry, but I think that we need to focus on humanizing this issue, and so I'm going to instead be vulnerable. I had my first son when I was 18, And when he was just over a year old, due in part to my own irresponsible choices, I found myself homeless with a baby. We slept in our car or people's basements. I eventually moved into an apartment with an abusive boyfriend, but ultimately had to leave. I was allowed to stay in an empty house for about a month, with our only furniture being a thrift store couch, a mattress for my son, and I slept on the floor. Somehow, I got into subsidized housing despite the years-long wait list. A bank, partnered with a nonprofit, covered the deposit for the apartment. Not long after moving in, I found myself in another abusive relationship, and for almost 10 years, I stayed. I stayed until I was so broken I didn't even recognize myself anymore and suffered from suicidal ideations. Having access to therapy and support from places like A-Stop here in Fond du Lac are what saved my life. Still, when I chose to leave my marriage, I found myself on the verge of homelessness again. Because I was the primary caretaker of our children, I did not have a reliable work history or money to pay for both a deposit and the first month's rent for an apartment. Now, most places require 3 months up front. As a result, I was denied every apartment I applied to until one person gave me a chance at a complex 45 minutes away from where my kids went to school. And again, I was starting over with nothing. I relied on nonprofits, food pantries for basic essentials, clothing, and food. My kids had beds because a nonprofit, which relied on donations from the community, gave them to us. Today, I am a homeowner, and I'm in my 3rd year of college, pursuing a forensic psychology degree that focuses heavily on sociological studies. I'm a single mom of 6 incredible children, my eldest son having just started college this fall to pursue a degree in sports medicine. It has been a long journey to get here, and the only reason I am where I am now is because I had access to resources, support, and assistance. And even with the help and privileges I have had, I still have to work multiple jobs, rely on support from others, and help from places like Broken Bread and Hope on the Block. There are not enough words to express my gratitude for those who helped and believed in me, and because others saw and believed in me, I experienced hope for a better life for myself and my children and began to believe in myself. If people had judged me harshly or turned their back on me, I wouldn't have the life I do today, and my kids wouldn't have the mom they do. I'm sharing this because we need to humanize the issue of homelessness. I first began helping the unhoused community over a decade ago in Chicago. That is scary, okay? It's a lot different from here. So I learned a lot. I joined Hope on the Block last year because I saw how dedicated they are supporting our community, and I want to be a part of giving others the same hope that was shared with me. Over the last year, I have been a part of helping hundreds of people in need in our community. I have sat with and held men and women in the unhoused community as they have cried and said that they felt like they couldn't possibly endure another day. I have talked to women out of unaliving herself because she was so devastated and ashamed of having to sell her body for a warm place to sleep because she couldn't survive another night in below zero weather. With our support, I watched that same woman get sober and find a job and a home. And when she relapsed after her boyfriend died and she had a miscarriage, I made sure she got somewhere safe and that she knew I wasn't giving up on her. And when she got sober again and began taking classes to get her GED, I was there to celebrate her success. I have seen the joy a pair of boots, a blanket, a warm bowl of chili, and a bed for a night can bring. These are real people. And yes, drug use and domestic violence exist with those who are unhoused just as they do with those who are not. However, those things are already illegal. The way this ordinance is written does not protect our community any more than it was before. All it does is make it easier for people to judge and discriminate against a group of people who are already at rock bottom. I swear I'm almost done. It makes it easier to make them invisible and forgotten about. You are targeting the wrong population of people with this. Where do they go? We have a 500-person wait list for Catherine Drexel. The warming shelter operates only months of the year and holds 30 people on a first-come, first-served basis. Incarcerating people for being poor is disgusting behavior and only hinders them further. while the city profits off their hardship. We need to build up our resources with funding and provide access to opportunities for growth. An ordinance like this should have never been passed without a reasonable solution attached. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Craig Molitor, who wishes to speak on the non-agenda item of homelessness.
So I come here tonight not certain if this is on the agenda or not. It's consistent with some of the comments that were made earlier, so unfortunately I try to limit my remarks to 1 minute, but I hope there's some understanding if I go over. I will say before we get to my planned remarks that I find agreement, sympathy and empathy with the folks that have spoke before me on many points, many points. Now to my prepared remarks. Thank you, City Council President Brawl, City Council, and City staff. At the most recent City Council meeting, I made remarks to the same group on the same topic. I'd like to further refine my stance because I feel it's a stance many of the folks in the business community impacted by this issue agree with. There is, number one, there is absolutely no desire to criminalize homelessness. The desire is to stop certain activities in the public sphere regardless of who commits those acts. These public activities include camping and, by default, urinating, defecating, and sleeping, but also panhandling, sex, and brawling. 2, the goal is to use every interaction with the vulnerable community, even if it occurs while issuing a citation, as an opportunity to bring folks under the umbrella of our official, multifaceted community of caregivers. 3, it would be super helpful if we had a comprehensive presentation of the pertinent ordinances and various organizations that work in this space. 2 weeks ago, we all agreed baby steps were taken. Please, let's keep up the momentum and dialogue for everyone's sake. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Steve Ave, who would also like to speak, I believe, on a non-agenda item.
So you're going to limit me to 1 minute? That's okay. Anyways, thank you, everybody that had the courage to step up and vote and begin the process. And I feel for all of you people that spoke here. I also was homeless, so I'm not the big bad boogeyman standing here with a pocket full of money. However, there's much more that needs to be done, in my opinion, and many other people downtown. I think we could all agree that 100% honesty would help out immensely. There needs to be a little bit better improvement, I think. Every time I've called the police department myself, the calls go to the dispatch center, and then the dispatch center picks and chooses what they want to put on the computer and dispatches to the police, I believe. That's what I was told. So if that was a little bit cleaned up, where the police department would get pure, clean information and then let them follow through on whatever they're going to do. For instance, when I asked for a no trespassing to be issued to somebody that I couldn't get them to move, that never happened. I followed up later with the police department, and sorry.
Yeah,
So, anyways, quickly, it's a great start. I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody in this room. You can call me up anytime. My phone number, anybody can throw out anywhere. And I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with anybody to help clean up. Nobody's targeting the homeless.
Thank you, Mr. Ave. Next, we have David Lefebvre, who also wishes to speak on the non-agenda item of homelessness.
Good evening. My name's David Lefebvre. I spoke at the last meeting concerning the homeless situation. This last Monday morning, when I woke up, I was reading on social media that the law would go into effect on Monday morning, and that hit home. It was like, oh, what are they going to do with the people? I understand. It's powerful. But on the other hand, I don't think this should go on. Yesterday, all of a sudden, nobody on Main Street. I'm thinking, well, maybe the people got some help, and they're in the system. Take a ride through the park after work, they're all out in the park. I just hope that everybody stays involved here and we can all find a solution, because at this point, it's disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, that ends our audience comments, so we will move on to our action items. First is action item A, resolution number 9143, a resolution approving the final plat of the White Pine Heights Phase 5 subdivision. Our introduction is by our Community Development Director, Ms. Benson.
Thank you, Ms. Brault. So as part of a residential development, if you're going to do a subdivision, there's a defined process under state statute. It starts with a preliminary plat that's reviewed by Plan Commission, and then a final plat that is reviewed by both Plan Commission and City Council. The plat basically identifies where infrastructure is going to go, such as a road, and then it also identifies the layout of the lots, dimensions of the lots, and where there's going to be any utility easements. This sets forth the ability to record the plat, and that is the basis for future residential development and the construction of the infrastructure. So this is actually White Pine Heights Phase 5, and this is a continuation of a subdivision that has been part of the city for a number of years. And so Plan Commission reviewed the preliminary plat, and as well as the final plat, and recommends approval to the City Council to move forward.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Benson? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Motion to approve. Motion by Mr. Godfrey. Second. And second by Mr. Heisler. Is there any other discussion or questions? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Next, we have item B, ordinance number 3799, an ordinance amending the City of Fond du Lac 2040 Comprehensive Plan, again introduced by our Community Development Director, Ms. Benson.
Thank you, Ms. Brault. As you recall, back in January of 2021, we adopted our 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And within that Comprehensive Plan document, it includes our future land use plan. So as part of the adoption process for the Comprehensive Plan, city staff does review the future land use plan. As you can imagine, we have over 15,000 parcels here in the city. And while we do our best to look at every single one of those parcels, sometimes we might overlook something. And this is a particular example of an area of the city where we overlooked. This was an area that's designated in our comprehensive plan as commercial. It's located on 11th Street, just north of Military Road. And as we know, it's kind of off the beaten path. Commercial development is really going to focus on Johnson Street, where it has high traffic volumes, or potentially on Military. And so really the area is actually currently used as manufacturing, and so the appropriate land use designation under the comprehensive plan would be industrial. And so this is really correcting an error that should have been caught as part of the review process. So both Plan Commission reviewed it, and staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Benson? Mr. Heisler.
Thank you. Thank you, President Brault. Just one quick question, Ms. Benson. How often do you guys do that review process? Is that on a case-by-case basis, or is that an annual, semi-annual situation?
Normally, as part of the comprehensive plan, we try to do it as once the map is there. But as we're kind of, looking at different developments, we might see something as we're comparing it to the comprehensive plan to be consistent. We'll all of a sudden notice something that kind of looks out of whack, and this is one of those situations.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to thank you and your staff for all the work on the comprehensive plan, because it is a really impressive document. There's so much there. I think I started it when I first started on council, and I haven't even begun to unpack everything. There's just no way. So, thank you so much to the Community Development Department and all that you guys do, because I just think we're really on a great path, and we're going to hear more great stuff tonight about the housing study, too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Schussler.
Ms. Benson, have you heard from neighbors at all about switching from commercial to industrial?
No.
The homeowners around? Or?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion. So moved. Motion by Mr. Heisler and second by Mr. Zimmerman. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Next, we'll move on to item C, ordinance number 3800, an ordinance rezoning 460 West 11th Street from C2 to M1. And once again, our introduction is by our Community Development Director, Ms. Benson.
Thank you, Ms. Brault. So this is a parcel that we included in our comprehensive plan amendment, and this was actually like a pipe fitters kind of building. It was a trade building, and so the building is for sale. It's no longer used, and we have a local contractor that would like to use it basically for the same purpose. However, as a contractor facility, that's not allowed in the commercial district, so it really needs to be zoned M1 manufacturing. And so Plan Commission reviewed it, and city staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Benson? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Mullen and second by Mr. Godfrey. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. Next, we have item D, resolution number 9144, a resolution declaring official intent to reimburse expenditures from proceeds of borrowing. And our introduction is by our Director of Administration, Ms. Davey.
Thank you. As we know, wastewater is undertaking 2 large projects over the next few years in their biosolids dryer and biogas pipeline. A few weeks ago, you authorized issuing revenue bonds to finance the equipment purchases for both of those projects, and we're now looking to apply for a Clean Water Fund loan through the DNR to finance the necessary construction for both of the projects. So the loan application requires that council adopts a reimbursement resolution, and that resolution essentially says that we can spend funds on the project in advance of the loan closing and then use the loan proceeds to reimburse the wastewater cash reserves. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Davey? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion. Motion by Mr. Schussler and second by Ms. Leering. Are there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. That ends our action items. So next we'll move on to our presentation of input items. We have our housing study and strategic plan presented by Community Development Director Ms. Benson. And I'm sorry.
Nope, you're good, Ms. Brault. Thank you very much, Ms. Brault. You know, Ms. Davey had to horn in on my night, so with her reimbursement resolution, so we're all good. So before I kick it off, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background and introduction. So as part of the 2040 comprehensive plan, there was a recommendation to undertake a housing study. We brought on Camoin Associates to help us with that effort, and it's going to be an assessment of our market and our needs. And I wanted to provide a little context before I turn it over to Robert O'Brien, and we also have Tom in virtual land as well. So housing or residential uses is a predominant land use in almost every community. Everything we often plan around and factor in terms of the placement of different land uses, whether it's manufacturing or commercial, all revolves around housing. But it's complicated because 2 factors. Most people have housing and do not consider housing a concern. And I think you saw that in some of the survey results. And the other part of it is that the housing market's not a singular market. It is unique to every individual local market. We have unique challenges, opportunities, resources, and strategies that are specific to us. And so Robert, as he's going through the work that they did, is going to highlight some of those. And this is going to be data that is going to be critical to share with our real estate professionals in the area, as well as developers for housing. This is what they're looking for when they're starting to look at communities and whether or not they're going to invest in housing in us. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert O'Brien from Camoin Associates and let him open the door, invite you in, and share with you what he's learned. Robert?
President Brault, members of the council, thank you for hosting us this evening. That was an excellent introduction. I'm going to show you tonight where we found themes where Fond du Lac lines up with national data and where you have unique indicators in your marketplace. So I am Robert O'Brien. I served as project manager on this housing study. I'm a senior housing specialist at Camoin Associates. I'm joined tonight with Tom Doretsky, who's online. He's our vice president and director of research. He served as project principal on this housing study. He is a technical expert and will be able to answer any questions you have at the end that I may not be able to get to. John Walker was the data analyst and is not with us at this presentation. Just very briefly, I want to summarize the purpose of this housing study taken directly from the request for proposals that the city issued. It is to analyze the housing stock and housing market within the city of Fond du Lac and to develop strategies to address the current and future needs of the community. The study is composed of many data reports, which I'll speak to first on the right-hand side of your screen. We looked at demographic composition of the community. We looked at economic data and employment data. We looked at the existing housing inventory. We conducted an affordability assessment of both rental and ownership housing stock. We looked at housing development trends, what's being built and where. We looked at the rental market trends and how those markets are moving, also for the for sale market, and then we conducted a housing market analysis, which is essentially the affordability of different housing types against local median wages. We also looked at the North Main Street corridor plan and the downtown Fond du Lac plan for their housing components and made recommendations on proceeding with the recommendations within those plans themselves. And then finally, we compared Fond du Lac's marketplace to the communities of Oshkosh, Sheboygan, Wausau, and La Crosse, which we understand are comparable communities to look at. For research, we conducted a site visit and tour early on in the study. We conducted interviews and focus groups, reviewed studies and plans, we conducted a public workshop and a public survey, and then in the report you'll find an executive summary, key findings, goals and strategies, and addendum with all these data reports and survey results. So I have just 10 key findings that I thought were pertinent just to give you a taste of the research and findings that we had. I'll move through them very quickly, and we'd be happy to entertain questions at the end if you'd like to go into them deeper. And then after the key findings, I'll just summarize 3 goals that we had for the city. The first finding that we wanted to share is that baby boomers, and this follows a national trend, are retiring and aging in place. It's often discussed in parlance that if we simply build more senior housing, baby boomers will move out of their family homes and then move into that replacement housing. But what we're finding nationally and what we're seeing in Fond du Lac is that a lot of baby boomers who are retiring are staying in place, and that's reflected in the current population. Also, this is to the credit of Fond du Lac. Fond du Lac has a healthy young population. You can see that the red circle there in this graph, that Fond du Lac's young population from ages 19 right through to 45 meet or exceed national trends for young people, and that's not the case in a lot of cities. So that is an excellent indicator of a healthy community. At the same time, Fond du Lac's population has not grown significantly over the last 20 some odd years. You can see Fond du Lac's population over that period from the year 2000 to 2023 only grew about 5.6%. Compared nationally, the United States population grew by 20%. So there's not a tremendous demand in the growth population occurring at this time. At the same time, Fond du Lac's median household income is lower than the county, the state, and the U.S. as a whole. It's a little below $60,000 as of 2022, compared to the county at large, which is about $70,000, the state, which is about $72,000, and the nation, which is about $75,000. At the same time, when we compare Fond du Lac's median household incomes to those other communities I mentioned early on, Oshkosh, Sheboygan, Wausau, and La Crosse, Fond du Lac's household income actually exceeds all those communities, though it's within the ballpark of the rest of them. So it's right on par for a city of this size, but it's slightly lower than the regional context. We also found that there's tremendous demand for rentals in the city of Fond du Lac. We usually measure this by a vacancy rate in rentals that is below 5%. 5% is considered the benchmark across the country for sort of a balanced housing market. You can see since 2017, some 7 years ago, it has never even approached 5%. vacancy rate within that circle. You can also see there was a 10% surge in vacancy rate in 2016, just below that circle. What that indicates is there was a large apartment complex that came online. That represents the 10% vacancy rate, and those were immediately absorbed within the next year. That shows tremendous demand in the market. This slide deserves some nuance, but what I wanted to describe is that for those who are currently renting, the rents that they have, those are not the rents that you can go out and get today, but the rents that they have now that are, in effect, grandfathered, if you will, are affordable for those making the median renter household income and higher. So for those who are already housed in rentals that are not out looking for an apartment right now, those rentals are considered affordable according to the census. What that indicates is that there are a number of people in current rentals at that median household income and higher who could potentially move into new construction or into sort of a higher quality product if it were available on the market, which would open up more rental units on the market for different income levels. You can see in the lower circle, those incomes that I'm talking about are between $50,000 and over $75,000 per household. This does not mean that there aren't folks who are not suffering under the burden of current rent prices. Nearly a third of all renters over a third of all renters right now are considered cost burden. Cost burden is a national standard defined by HUD as spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs. So a third of renters in the city are housing cost burden. And what's shocking is that nearly 60% of senior renters in the city are cost burden. Where this housing crisis that we're all experiencing all started, it's a national trend, and Fond du Lac follows that trend. I wanted to compare both the national data to the local data to show you how they're echoing each other. In the upper right-hand corner is a graph I recently put together for an essay that I wrote. You don't have to see the small numbers. I'm going to point on the screen behind you, but roughly around 2007, that is the beginning of the Great Recession, and housing production collapsed. And it went from over 2 million new housing starts in 2007 to the next year, it was just 500,000. And you can see in over a decade, we have never met that average line of housing starts that happened before the Great Recession. In the lower graph, you'll see those are housing starts in blue, reflected in Fond du Lac. So just before the Great Recession, 2004, 2005, 2006, we had a healthy level of housing starts, and then following in 2007, those dark blue housing starts fell off and have never sort of caught up to those housing productions line. We call this a housing deficit. Not only do we need to meet the demand for today, but we've lost that decade of production when demand did not slow down. So that is the sort of housing deficit we have to make up, including meeting future demand for housing as well. So this is number 9 out of 10. This is the ramifications of what's happening when you have an imbalance of supply and demand. These are for homeownership units. On the right, you'll see most recently in the last 3 or 4 years, the number of houses for sale is dropping on the market. Fewer people are selling. We've heard all about interest rates going up. Also, it's the people who sell also can't move to find something else to buy. They're locked into their interest rate. They don't want to sell and move into that higher interest rate. For all the reasons, there are fewer housing units on the market right now. And as a result, when supply drops and demand is up, prices rise. So you'll see in that graph in front of you, the red arrow is indicating the drop in housing units on the market, and that green line that's going up is the median sales price for houses. So inverse relationship, and that's what's happening, and you're all hearing about it, I'm sure, but that's how the data reflects it. On the left-hand side, we did an affordability analysis comparing median sales price to median household income locally. The top chart with that circle indicates that the income gap, meaning the amount of money you would need making the median household income to afford the median sales price, is missing almost $30,000. So households making the median household income need an additional $30,000 approximately in order to comfortably afford, responsibly afford, I guess I should say, the median sale price in Fond du Lac right now. That's the mismatch. And then the opposite of that, you see the home price gap. In order for homes to be affordable to those median household incomes in Fond du Lac, right now the median sale price is $70,000 over what median households can afford. So that's the mismatch. And then finally, this is a compliment to Fond du Lac, but your prices, even though they feel exorbitantly high locally, they are slightly lower than the broader region. So in 2023, for example, the median sales price in Fond du Lac was $220. For the county, it was $235, slightly more. For the median for all of Wisconsin was $285. And so because Fond du Lac is situated right in the middle of a commuter corridor, you were conveniently located between all these great markets in the state of Wisconsin, we would anticipate outside pressure where prices are higher to come into Fond du Lac and drive up prices because of demand for houses and compete with the local buyers. So it's a condition to consider. So those conclude 10 findings I just want to discuss tonight. Just dip our toes into the substance of the report. The report is much more robust, as you may have seen. And now I would like to discuss, just at a high level, 3 goals and some strategy approaches that we've recommended. I will say that these strategies are essentially food for thought. They are strategies we see happen in different markets across the country. We think they're well suited for your consideration, and they will require community discussion locally for future adoption if you've agreed that they are a good fit. So in our estimation of market demand for home ownership units, we estimate nearly 700 new units would be in demand in the next 5 years in Fond du Lac. Some approaches to get there. We've explored land lease models. Very briefly, I'll just say that is where a mission-based organization owns a land, will lease it to a homeowner for a nominal price, say $1 a year, and the homeowner can build any structure they want on top of it. In return for that lease, the organization can put a future sales price cap on that property. The homeowner will still make a profit from the property, but the price will be capped at an affordable level at a future date. What this also does too is it takes land costs out of the price of a home. If they're only leasing it for, say, $1 a year, land costs can compose nearly up to 30% of the price of a home. When you deduct that out of it, it suddenly makes that new house somewhat approachable for local incomes. Rent-to-own model is very simple. It's just like you lease a car. You would rent the house and have an option to purchase it after a period of time. It beats out the competition. You've heard of buyers going and competing with other buyers. This eliminates that. A list of opportunity sites is simply the city being proactive, saying that we think these sites are well suited for developers to come in and build housing. We want to be at the table to discuss how to make that happen. That generates conversations that wouldn't happen without those publicly published lists of opportunity sites. And then finally, it's an increase in density on new infrastructure. Road construction is extremely expensive, and that goes right to the price of housing. If you can make narrower lots that are deeper to allow for all the comforts of homeownership, but allow more sort of curb cuts per infrastructure, that reduces those costs to the purchasers of those houses. Moving on to the second of 3 goals that I want to talk about, we've estimated nearly 850 new rentals are in demand in the next 5 years. 3 very brief strategy ideas I wanted to put in front of you. One, we talked earlier about the tremendous cost burden experienced by senior renters right now. We think if you were to prioritize any low-income housing tax credit project in the city, we think a priority should be for seniors. Secondly, we do validate the findings in the downtown market study for housing and the North Main Street market study we believe you should pursue the infill development downtown. We know there's interest, we know there's traction on that, and our market study has found that the numbers support that. And then finally, I'll touch upon this briefly. Lots of folks have asked questions about what is actually happening in the market. We're very limited in knowing the rental market. We're very limited in knowing what's happening in the rental market. Our two primary sources are the census, which are voluntarily submitted, and so we get an aggregated number of renters who may or may not be submitting to the census and what their experiences are. The other market data we can get is from a database that's behind a paywall called a CoStar that we have access to. They have a survey of commercial rentals, and we get a glimpse of what's happening there. Otherwise, we have no idea what's happening in the rental market. And it's difficult for a city to respond to the marketplace without that sort of data. We would recommend, just for consideration, creating a registry for apartments just to track that market data. And it can be anonymous. By that I mean the data would be collected and aggregated. So you would say, here's the market price of what's happening in Fond du Lac. Here are the vacancy rates of what's happening in Fond du Lac. And you would be able to trend those over time and be able to discuss as a community whether interventions are necessary, if there's anything for the city or the community to do to assist in correcting that rental market. I would say landlords would benefit from this, and I'm a landlord myself, and I'm actually on a registry, in knowing where the rental market is. Landlords just sort of guess, they have other, it's more sophisticated than guessing, but they have to determine what rents are, and knowing where they fall in rents is helpful to them. Knowing what the vacancy rates are in the marketplace is also helpful to them. So this is a symbiotic tool, we think, to just gauge what's happening in the marketplace. The final and last slide I have for you is a theme that we heard regularly that we did not prompt. It came up in multiple different focus groups that were unrelated to each other, and that was the request from folks that we interviewed for more amenities in the city of Fond du Lac. These folks in these different focus groups made the connections of amenities to the housing market. We agree with them. We put this relationship graph up, if you will, of how they sort of serve the housing market and increase supply and production of housing. And so you can see at the top here, you have amenities, services, business, and jobs being added to the marketplace. Those attributes attract and retain young people, families, and professionals. Those young people, families, and professionals drive demand for new construction, more housing types, and more supply, and then the occupants of those housing units provide the workers and customers to support those amenities. We go into more detail in the report of where and how we think these could be accomplished in the city, and we agree that they would benefit the housing market overall. So, thank you very much. That concludes my presentation at this time.
Great. We're going to give Robert a breather before you. I see you going for your button, Mr. Mullen. All right. So I want to thank Robert and Tom for their work on this project. They've been a just great consultant group to work with, and so we appreciate their efforts. And so I just want to remind you that the housing study is not the beginning. So I know you're thinking, here's your 216-page document. We need to get going now. But I want to remind you, and I can relate anything to cake. So this isn't a tip cake. This is like a wedding cake. So we've kind of started the first tier. So if you're thinking about a tiered cake, the bottom one is always the biggest. So we've already started that. And so I'll remind you that as part of the 2025 budget, we put support in for public infrastructure for 2 subdivisions. You previously supported extending public infrastructure across Highway 151 to create our opportunities in our growth area. You supported the neighborhood mixed-use district, which allows for our mix of commercial and residential, along with different densities, which is different than any other district we've had, and there are design guidelines with that district. The city also recently amended our lot size requirements for our single-family residential district. You've supported the redevelopment of the former Beer Nuts into additional residential units into the downtown. You've proactively supported the redevelopment and conversion of a number of existing buildings into residential, such as Brook Street Lofts, Parish School Apartments, and Exchange at 104. And the city has laid the groundwork for future opportunities by developing and identifying redevelopment sites as part of the North Main Street long-term vision plan. So the housing study are the dowels. And for you, those of you who don't know cake, shame on you, the dowels are needed to support the next layer of cake. So what they do is they put dowels in the middle of the cake to support the next layer. And so the housing study throughout our tiered cake is going to be that support system. It's going to be the data, the recommendations that our real estate professionals, that our nonprofit partners, that our developers are going to look to help us build that next layer of cake, and then the next layer of cake. And so that's really what the goal and the purpose of our housing study does. And so with that, now you can have it, Robert.
Well, I think I would understand your cake illustration better if you actually brought in a cake, so. All right, but we will start the questions with Ms. Leering. Sorry, you were the first one.
I know.
And you beat Mr. Mullen to it.
There's a few things. Oh, no. Okay, so, I know people who have kids that graduated and they are now married and they want to get a house and they can't afford it, and they have good incomes because they have college degrees, and we just don't have affordable housing right now for them to get homes. So they're living in apartments that are costing, well, the rent is more than what a lot of us pay for our homes per month. So we definitely need housing. I feel that government, so I don't know if this is popular or not, but this is my feeling, is that government is never going to really solve this housing crisis. I feel like government needs to get somewhat out of the way and relax on zoning and let the developers come in and work on it, but we do all have to work together. In some areas where I feel the government can help would be like you have in the study, you mentioned the Housing First development. I think that's a good idea. And then advocating for tax credit allocation, that's a good idea too. The idea of concentrated housing, to me, I don't like it because it always, we need it, right? We need it in some areas of the city, in the downtown. I don't like the idea of it to be on the outer edges of the town. I think people need to be close to things, amenities and things that they can get to services and things like that. I'm worried about putting housing, concentrated housing, especially on the outer edges of town because, and in certain areas also, and building up retail space in certain areas because right now we have a main street, a lot of communities do this, and then their main streets die out because you need to keep the people near the main street and you need to build on the retail space near the main street. And right now, I think the two big places are where our former mall was, so that would be West Johnson Street and Main Street. And if we're putting housing and building retail, concentrating that maybe on East Johnson Street, that's going to take away from the businesses again on Main Street. That's just one possible concern I have about that. Another thing is that in the study, it was mentioned though that we should cultivate more retail and entertainment here in our city. I do feel that goes unnoticed. We do have a lot of retail and entertainment. We do have a lot of amenities and things for people to do. It just goes unnoticed because maybe we don't do a good job of putting it out there, but our downtown has picked up and it's doing pretty good. We have a lot of music and things going on in our town. But I have another concern too, because when government is involved, we tend to throw a big Band-Aid on everything and we go overboard. And we do have baby boomers that are going to be selling their homes and are going to be passing away. And we are going to be hit with an inventory of homes. And I don't think anybody thinks of that. And the people who have existing homes and the house values are going to be affected by that. So I just think some things we overdo. So I think we need to be really careful about this. We're kind of on the cusp of that. So if we're going to overload the market with, all these places, but we do need places for people on the lower end of the income. And I think I've said everything. Let me just look. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is that I do also like the idea of condo clusters, and I did like the idea of expanding the infrastructure. I feel like as a city we could invest more in that and annex some land for a subdivision and just put up more single-family homes that are smaller in size. I feel like having a city with more homes versus rental units is important as far as tax revenue goes. I also feel like it's important for people to be able to own a home and not just live in a concentrated type of housing unit.
Did you have any points that you wanted specifically addressed?
Well, yeah, the other thing.
I wasn't sure if there was a question there.
Well, no, I mean, there were some kind of in there. It was about the cultivating the retail and the entertainment. I guess I wasn't really sure about that because I feel like we have it. It's just maybe some of it got missed because we have yoga places and we have, the axe throwing and the restaurants and the wine places. I just don't think maybe we're not doing a good enough job of putting that information out there. I don't know.
That's a legitimate point. And I will say at the public workshop, that point did get raised. Someone specifically stood up and said, there are a lot of things happening in the city, and if you are tuned to it, you can connect to it. I will say that we also heard more comments saying, golly, I wish if we had such and such and such and such. The way we differentiate those two markets, the mall-type market versus the downtown, what I describe as the downtown being experiential retail versus a mall-type market being a destination retail. And the destination retail is going to be more of those larger type stores that aren't going to fit into a downtown. And the experiential retail are those small businesses that are niche, like the axe throwing, which I know does exist in Fond du Lac, which are perfect fits for a downtown marketplace. So I think they can coexist. What we've experienced in America over the last 50 years is when you have the same type of retail and they compete with each other. But once they're differentiated, I think you can have two viable retail districts.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen.
Thank you. Great presentation. I've been pouring through all 212 pages of the report for the last week. There's a lot in there. I did have a couple, just real quick first, let's get this out of the way. I had a question on the survey. We had 1,085 respondents, and then on each of the questions, we have the number of people answered, but then it says skipped. So what does skipped mean?
Well, just that. So you do have the option to skip, and also we broke the survey into tracks so that if you were a homeowner, you wouldn't be pushed through all the rental questions as well. We did ask some general questions for everybody. What do you see as biggest issues? But once you said, I currently rent, you went down a track of renting and you did not answer, or you were not provided the questions about homeownership.
Okay. So my specific question, one of the top 10 points was senior housing and how many are income challenged or income challenged.
Yeah.
One of the solutions that you had mentioned, I think, in your thing was ADUs. And I was wondering, is there a link between senior housing and ADUs?
Well, ADUs, as you probably know, are also called in-law apartments. And historically, before they were ADUs, that's exactly what they were for a younger family to provide housing for an aging parent. So it is one solution. We often find when you ask the broad populace if they would like an ADU, that's the number one reason why. It's both for an aging parent, but can also be for aging children who are having trouble finding housing outside. So ADUs are definitely one.
I guess I was asking not us specifically, but I mean, obviously, you've been doing this for a while. In other places, has that,
Yeah,
is that effective, or is it just not effective?
nationally, they're slow to take off. So nationally, they're super hot topic right now. Many communities are debating allowing them. A lot of communities have adopted them, but the marketplace hasn't really borne out to see a shift in the populace
Okay.
in the data.
All right, that was my question. Thank you. I think that's it for now.
We will move on to Mr. Schisler.
You know, the meeting at the firehouse, there was kind of a firestorm when people saw that $868 median rent because
Oh, right, yes.
2022, because that's just skyrocketed. It's more, I don't know, it's all anecdotal because like you said, it's hard to get data, but we hearing numbers, you know, 1,200, 1,300. Housing complexes that are not on the high end of our city, all of a sudden somebody hears their rent's going up by $400. I mean, so I just remember that from our time at the people that were there at the firehouse. It seems like that's kind of like this homeless issue. The rent increases is just a shock, you know, that's hit our community. And people mentioned at that meeting that it's a lot of landlords are no longer managing their own properties. They use a property manager, and they seem to have a pretty good handle on how to maximize their rent. I mean, they have expenses too. I'm not picking on landlords, but I was a landlord. But this is something it's come into our community very quickly, and it's one of the many challenges that you address, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heisler.
Thank you, President Brault. Excellent presentation. Thank you both very much. Great analogy with the wedding cake, by the way, Ms. Benson. As a guy who recently got married, that's one expensive cake. So you were pretty much nailed it for that being the thing there. I just have a couple of quick questions. So my situation is my wife and I are in an apartment right now downtown. We're looking eventually to either move into a better space apartment-wise that fits our conducive needs or a house. But the thing that I'm running into quite often, and the thing I saw addressed very well in your report, is that there's a lot of people who are, for lack of a better term, kind of interest rate locked, right? They have a really affordable interest rate, so they're not moving. I mean, one of my best friends is now driving 90 minutes from Fond du Lac to his job after changing jobs and wasn't changing his house because his interest rate was way too affordable. So do you think that's more of an inventory issue that'll eventually kind of help to that situation? Or, I mean, because obviously interest rates are probably not in the foreseeable future ever going to be as low as they were at that point.
Yeah, so this is where I pull out a crystal ball.
Yep, right.
My guess is that interest rates are going to come down and hover around 5%. Okay. That's where I see things going. We hit around 7%, and now with the Fed rate cuts, and they're talking about going down more, I think we're probably going to go down to about 5% and land. Already the 15-year mortgage rate right now is below 5%, so I can see the 30-year coming down to 5 as well. I think it's going to probably go there and stay, and at that point, I think all those folks who are interest rate locked, but where their current housing does not really suit their needs, they're traveling 90 minutes, they're going to say, all right, this is the best I'm going to get, and they're going to suddenly put their house on the market. And that 2-point difference between 3% and 5%, they're going to say, good enough, I'm just going to make it work. So that's my guess of how that's going to self-correct in the next couple of years.
Makes a lot of sense. I appreciate the perspective, and don't worry, I won't hold you to the crystal ball. That's not a fun thing.
This isn't recorded, right?
Right, exactly. No, nobody's watching. It's fine. No, I'm just kidding. And then I guess the only other question I had for you is related to senior housing. We're in a situation where, like my parents, as an example, they've been in their home for a very long time. They're in a situation where they probably don't need to age in place because it's too large for them, but they're not really the type to move into a senior community at this point. So do you think that's a situation where we need smaller homes for seniors? Is that where you would advocate? Or when you specifically mention let's focus on senior housing, what types of units are we looking at?
So that is a great question. And I do want to acknowledge this. It's not universal. There are plenty of retirees who say, I would love to move into a one-bedroom condo. That'd be wonderful. Thank you very much. That does exist. I guess what I wanted to point out is what a lot of folks overlook in the marketplace is an assumption are those baby boomers who found their forever house either before they retired or they've been in it for 50 years and they don't want to leave. Even if it's a 5-bedroom house and it's just 1 or 2 of them in there, they're sentimentally attached to it. It's all paid for. They can afford it. Why would I want to leave? Why would I want to go through the stress of moving? And so they're staying put, even if it's not right-sized. We find that that's a real condition in the marketplace. The other thing that's happening that we've heard in other markets and very well may be happening here is that those retirees who've owned their house for decades have built up so much equity, through no fault of their own, but they've built up so much equity that if they were to go and sell, we all know they could profit a tremendous amount. And there are lots of folks who are in that situation that say, well, if I'm going to get all this cash in for it, I actually want to move into something a little bit luxurious, something really comfortable. I don't want to move into that 1-bedroom condo. And so we're hearing in other markets, realtors telling us they want a 3-bedroom ranch on a 2-acre lot. And that's still probably oversized for them, but they want to host the family for Thanksgiving and all those things. So they're still buying. They're going out and rebuying houses that are sort of oversized for their daily living situation. And that's another condition I just want to point out that's happening. If we built all these 1-bedroom condos, there may not be as much demand as we think there might be from retirees.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent answer. I really appreciate that. And I think that wraps up my questions. So again, great job on the cake, Ms. Benson.
All right, I don't see anybody in the queue, so I'm going to jump. Oh, wait, we have Mr. Mullen if you would like your second opportunity, or otherwise, I definitely have questions, so. Okay, Mr. Mullen.
Ms. Benson, you can probably answer this, or our guest here. We need senior housing. We're talking about senior housing. That's going to be a high priority. There is an actual federal definition of senior housing if you're going to try to take advantage of those monies versus senior attractive housing that does not have those kind of restrictions. And can you kind of, just for everybody's information, kind of speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So first and foremost, there's fair housing law. And so in order to not violate fair housing law and discriminate based on age, because it goes both ways, so the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has established a 55 and older housing. That's what they considered senior housing. For those of us approaching that, whew. But the point of the matter is once you're designated senior housing, if you no longer comply with that standard, then you lose your accreditation to actually limit your tenants to seniors. So there's that aspect so that you can just basically market to seniors. Then the other aspect of that is through the various tax credit programs that are focused on seniors. And so again, meets a certain standard of age. And then you're allowed to have the tax credits, and again, solely focused for seniors. And then you have what we call senior attractive. And so those are some of the developments that we have here in the city, most recently over on Ducharme. And so those are some of the smaller units that Robert was talking about, the condos, where the kind of yard maintenance is all taken care of. They're smaller. They can downsize, enjoy travel. And so while many of those individuals are perhaps of the senior mindset, it is not actually designated senior housing. It just happens to be that the majority of the people residing in that development are seniors because that's who it was attracted to.
Right. And from a builder standpoint, the senior attractive has a lot more hurdles, or a lot less hurdles they have to jump, and a lot less hoops they have to jump through, rather than going the route of, getting the money and putting up, real senior housing.
That's correct, because usually if you're senior attractive, you have a larger market. So for example, if you don't find anybody, and oftentimes also with senior attractive, your rents can be usually at a larger price point, where if you're actually designated senior housing, you usually have a price point that you need to meet and be limited to.
Thank you. I just want people, because there's going to be discussion, why don't we have more senior housing? And there's there's this thing in the background that makes one more attractive to a potential developer than another. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, well, I'm not seeing anybody in the queue, so I'm going to jump in and ask some questions, but other council members, feel free to hit your button if you think of more things to ask. So I kind of want to go back to the point that Mr. Heisler was making about, like, if you build certain types of housing, would it get people to move out of their homes and into smaller units or whatever? And you also talked about rentals, and if you would build more rental units at a higher price point, the people who are in kind of the lower priced apartments might move up. But I'm wondering if you've seen any evidence of that, because anecdotally, you know, knowing people my generation, we're saddled with a lot of things. Our incomes have not been as high as past generations. We've got student loan debt. There's a lot of factors that are limiting people's mobility. So I have friends who are living in some very low-cost apartments who have told me even if more was built, they would not leave, in part because of the income disparities that we're seeing, and also just because moving is just so terrible that, you know, like if you're comfortable in your place, why would you move? So I was curious if you've seen communities where this has worked, where more rentals have led to that mobility.
Yeah, to make it helpful, I've seen conflicting reports. I think there was a study of Harvard that said you build luxury housing and the migration does not happen vertically, or it's very slow. But I've also seen another study that happened in my home state of Maine that said there is a direct impact after several changeovers of that apartment. You do see migration out of lower priced apartments into the new builds. So even though there's conflicting data, they both indicate there is some migration across. I will say, you're right, not everyone who has a good priced apartment, even if it doesn't suit their needs, is going to make that choice, that values choice to spend their money on that. But you'll also hear of other families where it does make the right choice. We heard from a counselor this evening who said their circumstances may change and they'll want different housing. Mm-hmm. And also just anecdotally across the city, we heard lots of people reference, is it Riverview, the new construction? River Hills, yes. There are a lot of people who just said, gosh, we wish there were more of that. We know that those are high-priced but high-quality apartments, and through the various forums, multiple people had said, I wish we had 3 more of those, for example. Young professionals, other people moving here, just people who want that new build experience and are willing to pay for it. So I think there is a marketplace for it, even if it doesn't suit everyone in their current housing situation.
I could just add to that, Ms. Brault. So the 2 things to think about is not only are we trying to serve the needs of our housing for our existing resident base, but we also want to grow as a community. And so we have to factor in that a lot of our business community has workers who are living outside of the city who would like to live within the city. And so we have to balance all of those interests. And so I think some of the aspects that Robert's talking about for those rentals and those homes are also being attractive to those so that they choose to not only work here, but also live here so that the city can continue to grow.
Thank you. That's a good point, too. Let's see. Another thing I wanted to ask about was the concept of the land lease, because I was at a conference the past few days and went to a session on housing, and it was a new concept that I'd never really heard about before. And you mentioned how it could be new builds where someone else would own the land and lease that to the person who ends up purchasing the home. So I guess I'm wondering, does that typically only work if it's new builds or could my existing property where I have a house already, could that turn into a land lease situation?
That would be a legal arrangement, but
well, I mean, is that part of this concept? Not like, could I do it, like me specifically?
Well, from a management standpoint, you would want a contiguous area of lots that the mission-based organization could run. This is somewhat similar to a trailer park model, where the park owns the land and then the residents own the properties on top of it, the improvements on top of it. It's the same thing, except it's a mission-based organization, and again, typically it's on a campus as opposed to one-by lots. Though there's nothing legally preventing that. In the report, I cited a land trust organization, I believe in North Carolina, and they own several different campuses. So they have disparate campuses. And I don't know that they're lot by lot, but they're definitely broken up. And so it's not just one contiguous area. Okay. So different models can work.
Well, and I guess I'm wondering, what is the difference, or what are the benefits potentially of that sort of model versus something like offering like a down payment assistance where the homeowner would own the property and the home, and they would just be getting that assistance up front, and they'd still be able to build the equity that would include their property versus someone else owning the land, and that someone else gets to basically appreciate on that property.
I think the difference is the perpetual benefit. So if you get a one-time assistance with a down payment, that affects that new homeowner, and it isn't necessarily recycled forward. Whereas if you have a mission-based organization that owns the land, which is leasing it for, say, $1 a year, and will never sort of increase those mission-based rents, they will price cap, as I mentioned, so the owners can resell and make a profit, but it will be limited. But the benefit, the perpetual benefit, is it goes to the next buyer who can buy it at an affordable level. So it can appreciate, you can gain equity, you're limited on how much equity you can gain. But the perpetual benefit is it gets passed forward to the next buyers.
Okay, it's just such an interesting concept, and like I said, I'd never heard about it before, so that's interesting to think about. So thank you for that. And then finally, I wanted to focus on a little bit on the housing first development. That was one of your goals that you'd mentioned in the larger report, because I know Ms. Leering had also touched on it. And I was wondering if you could just kind of expand on what a housing first development is, especially because we've had so many people who are very interested in homelessness in our community.
Yeah, so at a very high level, so I don't have the entire capital stack that I can go through out of every dollar and cent that goes into it, but at a high level, there are 3 components that go into making a housing first development work. So you have a private developer, often they're mission-based, but they're a private developer who comes in and agrees to build the facility, build the residential structure. They will go and apply for low-income housing tax credits, which is a federal program that have been mentioned before tonight. They'll get a benefit, a tax credit that they can sell to build that structure, so they get a subsidy to build the structure. That is one way to make it work. And then the residents who will ultimately move into those apartments will be identified typically by an organization that works closely with homeless, and they'll look for chronically homeless folks in the community who are the best candidates to move into this area, into this property. They can use Section 8 housing choice vouchers to help pay the rent in that place, so the developer gets paid rent for those apartments. And then there are federal funds to assist an organization that provides the casework, the social work, to assist the folks, the residents in that property to navigate life. So those 3 components go into making housing first work. They're permanent housing, affordable housing for folks who are recently chronically homeless. Ideally, it's a transitional stage. Ideally, once they have that support, that literal grounding under their feet, and have that casework, they can move into permanent housing out in the private market over time.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen.
Yeah, just one brief comment. This evening we've talked about homelessness, we've talked about income-stressed seniors and others like that, and I just wanted to say that Mr. Moore and Ms. Benson have made it clear to me for the last 4 years there is a need at all levels of the market. And if you look at our comprehensive plan, some of the things we're doing, we're addressing all of that, even though we're spending a lot of time tonight talking about helping out the lower income worker housing, things like that. So that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from any other council members? No, I'm not seeing any, so thank you so much for your presentation and for answering all of our questions, and thank you, Ms. Benson, for presenting this part of the cake. And I know we will have plenty more to talk about with regards to housing, so thank you for presenting this piece of it. All right, with that ends our input items, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Motion by Mr. Zimmerman, second by Mr. Heisler. This is not debatable. Please proceed to vote. And that passes unanimously. We are adjourned.
Louder next time. Louder. No, break it.